lesson 9.3, page 388 in the 8th grade Blue Big Ideas book. This video is for both the 7th Accelerated and the 8th General. However, this lesson is not in the 7th Accelerated book. However, we do need to cover it. Continuing with our discussion of data analysis and displays, lesson 9.3, we are going to construct two-way tables and we're going to identify the relationships between the categories of the two-way table. Our essential question, how can you construct and read a two-way table? Now I know, being a person of character that you are, you have figured out throughout the course of this year the value and the importance of taking some of your own notes first. Just spending a few moments taking and reading and taking notes on what we're going to talk about so that when we discuss it, it reinforces what you read, and then maybe we are going to add to it. All right, here there's probably not a whole lot we're going to add to, but we're certainly going to discuss it. It says, a two-way table displays two categories of data collected from the same source. So let's take a look at this two-way table. Two categories of data. The first category that I'm going to recognize is students. And the second category is the grade. All right, so there's two categories collected from the same source. So what would be the source? That's right, it would be the students that are the source of this data. All right, it says you randomly surveyed students in your school about their grades on the last test and to whether they studied for the test. The two-way table shows your results. Each entry in the two-way table is called a joint frequency. So that means, according to the picture, that this 21, this 2, this 1, this 6, all these entries in the two-way table are called joint frequency. Okay? And so when we look at these two categories, students, you can see whether they studied or not, and their grade, whether they passed or not. So we're going to talk about that first in this video, and then we're going to talk about the next thing, which says the sums of the rows and the columns in a two-way table are called the marginal frequencies. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but right now let's talk about these joint frequencies in a two-way table. So our same two-way table here on students and whether they studied or not, and on their grade, whether they passed or not. And our first question says, how many students who studied passed the test? So it's very important in reading and interpreting and identifying information in a two-way table that you read the question very carefully. Okay, so right here it says, how many students who studied? Well, that's one category right there. Student who studied. How many students who studied passed the test? All right, so now we have passed the test. That is our second category. For our grade, passed the test, we come this way and we look for the joint frequency where those two pieces of information intersect. And we can see that that happens right here. Studied and passed the test. 21 students studied and passed the test. That answers the question straightforward. Our next question, number 2. How many students failed the test who did not study? So now our first category is actually the grade. How many students failed the test? So right here, grade, failed the test. We're coming across in this direction. And then we need to look at the other category, who did not study. So again, students who did not study, and we're going to come down. And we can see that the blue's got to continue all the way over here, and we come down the column there, and we can see that 6 is the intersection. Students who did not pass the test, and they also didn't study. That almost makes sense, that if you don't study, you don't pass the test. Make sense? So depending on how the question is related, depends on where the intersection is of the categories, that joint frequency is then the answer to a typical type of question. I could go through a whole bunch more, but I think you kind of get the gist. We're going to have a lot of practice in class. So now let's talk about those marginal frequencies. Right here it says, find and interpret the marginal frequencies for the survey. So if you recall from our notes, it said that marginal frequencies were the sums of the rows and the columns. So basically, depending on which category, depends on whether it's a row or a column. So using our same two-way table on whether the students studied or did not study and whether they passed or failed the test, let's take a look at the rows first. So we're going to say our grade, whether they passed or not. So if I go across this row, every number in this row, I can come across and find the total. 21 plus 2, that gives me 23. And to interpret that, That's 23, and we went through the row of passed, the category of grade of passed. These passed the test. So that's how we interpret it. We found it, 23 students passed the test. That's the finding the marginal frequency and interpreting it. And then we can see where those who failed. And when we come across this row, we have 1 plus 6, so 7 failed the test. 7 being the marginal frequency, failed the test being the interpretation of that number 7. Pretty straightforward. Now we can go to student, and we can go down this first column, studied, and when we come all the way down, we count 21 plus 1, 22. 22 what? Students studied. So 22 students studied the test. 22 being the marginal frequency, studied being the interpretation. And of course, when we go down the other column, and we continue down, we add 2 plus 6, we get 8. 8 students did not study. So when we find 8, we found the marginal frequency. When we interpret that number 8, we say that that 8 represents students who did not study. Now there's one other thing, because we do have an additional row and a column. And I'm going to take it right here, this row right here, and I'm going to call it the green row, and I'm going to come across this way, and I'm going to take the green column and come down that way, and that means there's a box right here where I'm going to put a number. And that box is important, because that box should be the same total whether we go column or row. So if I count 22 plus 8, I get 30. 23 plus 7 is 30. And if I interpret that, what is that? That's 30 students surveyed. Okay? So we can also find that total right there. So finding and interpreting the marginal frequencies just means using the sum of the rows and the columns, and based on that row or column, however it's tiled by its category, that would be your interpretation. So that ends our first video. Here's your first quick write. You randomly surveyed students in the cafeteria about their plans for a football game and the school dance. The two-way table shows your results. So you have 2 parts. You're going to have to pause the video and put down quick write 1A, quick write 1B, and answer those questions. When you're done, take a quick break, and of course, come back and see us for video number 2.